election night in Oklahoma. Good evening from the Oklahomans video studio. I'm Dave Morris, a busy newsroom behind us, and here on set, I'm joined by Ben Felder, Chris Castile, and Justin Winget. It's runoff nights as we see who journeys forward in the election campaign towards the November 6th general election, and about 40% of the precincts are reporting, so we're getting a pretty good idea, guys. Ben, I'll come to you first. Pretty good idea about how these races are shaping up.
Yeah, as we're starting to see a lot more precincts come in. I mean, a lot of people are focused on the Republican runoff for governor, and right now it's Kevin Stitt is starting to pull away with this thing, and it's starting to kind of look more like a landslide for him. We'll
dive into that with Chris Castile here in just a second, and some of the congressional races with Justin Winget as well. But we are happy to be joined on the phone by Brian Dean from the State Election Board. Brian, always a busy day for you and your crew there. We certainly appreciate your help. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks for having us.
Always happy to have you, Brian. And I guess the obvious question to you, as much as you can answer this question, how was voter turnout today?
You know, it's kind of early to get a good idea and a good number. I mean, as far as what we were kind of expecting, you generally always see a drop-off historically from a primary to a runoff. And in particular this year, we had an incredible turnout for the primary. I mean, we had more people turn out for this year's gubernatorial primary than we had for the general election in 2014. And that's just, to have that kind of turnout for a primary is really, really unusual. But, we have our voter registration numbers are up, and if you look at this, we try to compare apples to apples. So you want to look at other runoffs, and it can be sometimes difficult with runoffs because often you have maybe one party doesn't have a statewide runoff, and then it's very difficult to kind of gauge turnout from a statewide perspective because there's just not enough on the ballot. But I'm expecting, if you look at other runoffs, this will be probably a little higher than usual, but we certainly probably won't get to the numbers we saw for the primary.
Brian, I have to ask you this question. We saw across the nation, Arizona had some problems earlier today. Any reports of problems across Oklahoma that you've heard of?
Nothing more than just kind of the usual little things here and there. No election's ever perfect. We have almost 2,000 precincts in Oklahoma, and so there's always little issues here or there where, a machine, they got to work on it for a little bit, or there are issues at a polling place that get dealt with by the county. But we haven't had anything just tremendously unusual or anything that caused voters to not be able to cast ballots in a timely manner or anything of that nature.
Very good. We had a story published on News OK today looking at Oklahoma's 6-year-old voting system and officials there saying it's secure. Brian, school me on this a little bit. If there are fewer, and this would probably be an obvious question, but fewer voters means perhaps faster turnaround of the ballots being counted.
Often there's a correlation there. I mean, anytime you have a statewide runoff, you're going to have some it's going to be a bit of a longer night just because, you have every precinct's got to line up. And if you ever get a chance to go look at the operation at say, like Oklahoma County Election Board, they have precinct inspectors from all the polling places. They have to physically, obviously, drive back to the county election board with the voting machines and the ballots, which are in a sealed ballot transfer case, and they've got to turn those in, and then the county election boards have to open those one by one and plug open up the lock boxes that have the storage devices with the votes on them, and go plug those into the tally computer, and then you have to double check those against, and we talk about security. One of the biggest things is at the end of the night, the polling place, the precinct workers, they print out a tape essentially that has the results from that precinct. They post one copy on the door of the polling location. They take more copies back to the county. Well, the county has to check those tapes against what their reports are showing to make sure everything matches up. So there's a lot that goes into it, and so sometimes I know that people want it to go faster, but you mentioned looking at some other states. Well, we get results pretty fast in Oklahoma as compared to most of the states out there. So hopefully we won't be too late this evening.
He's Brian Dean, always dropping the knowledge every time we chat with him from the Oklahoma State Election Board. In fact, I remember a couple months ago, Brian, you were telling us that the election counting wouldn't be slowed down. They were even counting in the back of a pickup truck, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think up in Tulsa they had a case where the polling location was locked and they couldn't get in.
That's right.
And so they had a poll worker who used some ingenuity, or the 3 poll workers there, and the precinct inspector they got the voter registry out, and they had people start casting ballots out back of a pickup. So our poll workers are pretty resourceful, and the main thing we want to make sure of is that everybody's got a chance to vote, and we will always make sure that everyone gets a chance to vote, and even if that's by a provisional ballot, if they're not listed, or however we have to make that occur, we can always go back later and try to get the research done on those, but we want to make sure everybody gets a chance to vote.
Good stuff. He's Brian Dean from the Oklahoma State Election Board. I know it's a busy night for you, sir. We'll let you go. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, guys.
All right, gentlemen. Again, Ben Felder, Chris Castile, Justin Winget here in the Oklahomans video studio. Vice President of News Kelly Fry sitting just off camera watching us over here. Gentlemen, the results continue to come in. We're over 50%. And Chris, I'll come to you. Kevin Stitt with I would say, comfortable lead over Mick Cornett at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of flirting with landslide territory, which is around 55%. Still kind of a low percentage in Oklahoma County and Tulsa County, but I think because it's low in both counties, it means it's going to be hard for Cornett's going to do quite well here in Oklahoma County, but Stitt's going to do quite well in Tulsa County. So it looks like this race has sort of kind of shaken out to where it's going to end up.
You know, Chris, at the 7 o'clock hour, we mentioned how you had followed this race more closely than anybody. You traveled to a lot of the locations that these candidates stumped in. So looking at the county by county results, anything surprising to you?
It is interesting. I mean, I've been to Lawton 2 or 3 times with Cornett. He really wanted to win down in Comanche County. And the last time I checked before we came on, he was getting thumped down there. And I actually don't even remember Stitt going to Comanche County. I know he has. He's been to every county and every town multiple times. But the other one I looked at was Woodward, out west. And I went to Woodward with Cornett a few weeks ago. It was a really good trip. And good crowd for the former mayor there. And he's losing big there too, so I don't really understand some of these counties. He is winning Garfield. Woodward is a western farming community. It's got oil and gas too, but Enid, Garfield County, which Cornett surprisingly won over Todd Lamb on June 26, he's winning there too. But all the eastern Oklahoma counties, I was looking at Atoka, I looked at Bryan, Muskogee, Rogers, which is right outside Tulsa, it's Claremore. Stitt's winning big in those. So, if you look at this, at these results as being kind of suburbs and rural areas, Stitt's got it won, very big in those areas. And if it's kind of the same percentage in Oklahoma County and Tulsa County still to come in, well, that'll be a wash for the most part. So one of the other counties I was looking at, it's Canadian County, which is El Reno, and it's in this market. It's big Oklahoma City market. It's basically, I don't want to call it just a suburb of this because it's more than that. But anyway, it's in his wheelhouse. He won it, Mick Cornett's wheelhouse. I mean, he won it big on June 26. And the last I checked, Cornett had 53, and I think that's not a big enough margin.
The margin's even more narrow now in Canadian County. 19 of 50 precincts is 51% for Cornett.
That's not. He's got to win that county big. 3 of the 4 biggest Republican registration counties are right here: Oklahoma County, Canadian County, Cleveland County. The 4th is Tulsa. So you've got a huge number of Republicans in this area. Cornett won these counties big in the first round, and he needs to now because he's obviously not doing that well in rural areas. If he's only getting 51% in Canadian County, then it's not going to be a good night for him.
Well, this was always going to be a tough night for Cornett.
Right.
I mean, he was a candidate that I think we expected would do well in the primary. I mean, he ended up getting the most votes in a crowded field. A primary in June that saw historic turnout. You maybe saw a lot of moderate Republicans came out that were supporting the medical marijuana question that was on the ballot. I think a lot of people expected that if he could make it to November, that he may do well there again. It's kind of more moderate Republican that would appeal maybe even to some Democrats.
Oh, he would. Yeah, he'd gotten
The
crossover.
runoff was always going to be what kind of tripped him up.
Right.
You have your most conservative conservative, I mean, some of your most conservative voters in the country
are
voting tonight.
Right.
And that just is not Cornette's base. I mean, he has his career has been built as this, pragmatist, moderate Republican.
And that's what he couldn't surmount. You know, I mean, even though he kept taking these positions, some of which to the right of Fallon, like on abortion and guns. He was to the right of Governor Fallon on those. I think there was just maybe people weren't ready to suspend their disbelief that much. I mean, besides having the Oklahoma City thing to overcome in these rural areas, and that's a real thing, he also had to overcome an impression of him being a moderate. I mean, there's just no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And
guns and abortion, these weren't issues that he was having to discuss or talk about as mayor, and he always even kind of came across as, even in the national spotlight, a lot of people like to look at him as a Republican mayor that was able to do progressive things with the MAPS tax and those kind of things. And, he really kind of championed that viewpoint, which once again may have played well in November, played well in June. But a late summer runoff for the Republican Party in Oklahoma is a very tough lift.
And again, I mean, not to belabor this, he did not help himself with those ads. He just flat did not help himself with the people who are voting today.
At this point, with over 1,100 of the 1951 precincts reporting Kevin Stitt with 54% of those votes at this point. Another race, Chris, you're covering, and we can probably go ahead and call this one. For Lieutenant Governor, Matt Pannell over Dana Murphy. He's got 58% at this point.
Quite a turnaround. He finished second to Murphy in the June 26th primary. Murphy's an incumbent. She's a corporation commissioner. This is not a good year for incumbents in any office. And Matt Pannell he's been just kind of a Republican Party politico. I mean, he's held all kinds of positions in the state and national parties. The last, which I think he was kind of the state, working for the Republican National Committee, he oversaw all the state party organizations. So he would go to every state in the union trying to work out whatever problem state party. But I'd say this about Murphy. She was the one statewide candidate who never went negative. She never ran negative ads.
It's the story you had in Sunday's editions of the Oklahoma, which was chock full of great political and election information. That's what you mentioned. She was one who stuck with a positive ad, one of the few statewide candidates.
And there'll be consultants all over the state or probably the country going, look, this is the one candidate, and look what happened to her. Because you wonder sometimes, well, what good do these ads do? And supposedly the consultants are going, you got to go negative, man. If they go negative against you, what? So she stays positive the whole time and winds up.
The other thing in this,
I'm not trying to say that's why. I don't know why why this race turned out this way.
Pannell, 38 years old. His quote he gave you or mentioned at a recent GOP dinner: "I'll get rid of my security detail. Give me an RV, and I'll sell the heck out of this state."
Yeah, I think Stitt made some joke about. Stitt spoke right after that and made some joke about the RV that I wish I could remember because it's kind of funny. But one of the things that he wants to do. I mean, lieutenant governor candidates talk a lot about tourism, promoting the state, because there aren't really many official duties. They kind of have to make up what they're going to do. And tourism's always been one of those things. And one of Matt's deals, Route 66, which I think people have thought of that before. There seems to be a lot of promotion of Route 66, but what the heck,
Would that change if those two positions were on the ballot together, governor and lieutenant governor?
Be if this, good point. There's a state question in November to make the governor and lieutenant governor candidates run as a ticket. And that first one would be 8 years from now, 2026, if that passes. So I don't know if their job would change that much. I mean, for their job to change much, you have to give them, either by statute or constitution, more duties.
Well, if Matt Pannell hangs on, and again, 58% at this point, he will face Senator Anastasia Pittman. She's the Democratic nominee, and again, the general election coming up November 6th. I've not forgotten about you, Mr. Justin Wingeter. You're covering our congressional runoffs today, but another runaway in the 5th Congressional District.
Yeah, actually, many of the congressional races tonight are runaways. Especially, the best example definitely in the 5th District, and as you see it there, that is not much of a race right there. And we knew, obviously, that Horn was the front runner and that she was certainly favored to win by a large amount. And that's why right there. I mean, it's a pretty clear runaway, but most of the races right now are not exactly close. There's that first district race we talked about on the Republican side is going for Kevin Hearn right now. The other races,
the outsider in that race.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And just as we talked about a good night for outsiders, it continues there in the first district.
Kevin Hearn, 56%.
Yep. Most of those races are decided by 10 points right now, and so, or at least they were as I walked in.
Yep, and I'm looking at the numbers here. You're exactly right.
Yeah,
they're still in that territory.
Does Kinder Horn have any money left to start the general, or is she going to need national money and meet like really quick?
I would have to check. Yeah, in the first district, you mean? That's
No,
in
Kinder
what
Horn.
race? Oh,
Yeah,
in Horn.
Fifth district.
Yeah, I didn't hear what you said there. That she has, I think, 40,000 left. Yeah, somewhere in there. I would have to check, but numbers are a little outdated because they were a few weeks ago. So
Okay.
she has been able to raise, I mean, quite a bit of money. A very proficient fundraiser for a Democrat in this district has been highly unusual.
Yeah,
so
you bet.
if she can keep that up, she can compete with Russell in fundraising, and we'll see. It could be interesting in November.
She'll go up against the incumbent U.S. Representative Steve Russell again in November. Ben, a race that you have been paying a lot of attention to, Superintendent, not exactly a close race tonight.
Yeah, this was one of the few incumbent statewide seats, or statewide officials that are on the ballot. I mean, you know, we probably expected it to be kind of a landslide victory for Superintendent Hoffmeister, but the big question is this has obviously been an interesting year for education. We saw the 2-week teacher strike in April. There's a lot of voter frustration towards the state's funding of education and funding of schools. As a superintendent, though, she's done a pretty good job of aligning herself with the causes of teachers. She's put herself up as a big advocate for increased funding for teacher pay. Linda Murphy, her challenger, who's no stranger to running, she ran a couple times for state superintendent in the early 90s, really tried to appeal to that deeply conservative electorate. She actually accused the superintendent of being too closely aligned with the teachers, specifically the teachers union, but that message doesn't seem to have been that effective. But Hoffmeister vastly outspent Murphy. She's, like I said, she's an incumbent in a year that's tough for incumbents, running for a position that's got some, you know, in a realm that's been controversial this year, education. But because of the way that she's been able to kind of position herself as a voice for teachers, sometimes in opposition to her own party, I think we kind of expected this to be a pretty strong night for her. And a win tonight is likely going to be a win in November. Democrat John Cox is awaiting. He's run before, but she will. Her war chest will be greatly larger than his. She's definitely got the name recognition, and so it looks like in a year when education has been a big talking point, the state's top school chief is probably going to remain.
Well, guys, speaking of a lot of money being thrown around in a campaign, the race for Attorney General Drummond still leads Mike Hunter at this point, 50% to 49%. That's turning out to be a pretty close race.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is another. There's not very many statewide incumbents on the ballot. This is another one, and we talked about in our 7 o'clock spot. Are voters going to see him as the incumbent? I mean, he's now been in this seat for more than a year, so I mean, it is his. He is the Attorney
He's
General.
the incumbent. He's in the seat.
Yeah, but has been pretty active in really kind of promoting the work of his office, especially around targeting drug manufacturers and kind of trying to fight the opioid crisis. Mm-hmm. But like I said, in a year where voters are maybe not too keen on incumbents, that may be holding him down here.
1357 of 1951 precincts, and he has a 50 to 49% lead.
That is another one that is there a big Oklahoma County, Tulsa County split in that?
He's got a big lead in Oklahoma County.
Hunter does.
Or Hunter does,
right.
yes.
And then Drummond, a big one in Tulsa.
That would be expected, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, Drummond and Tulsa, 54 to 45.
Yeah, so larger lead for Hunter. He's got a wider lead in Oklahoma County than Drummond does in Tulsa County, but not even half of those precincts in each county have been reported yet.
Nothing more compelling than watch people do some searching online while you're watching a live webcast.
Another thing to mention too, we talk about incumbents. Dale Denwalt, who's back in the newsroom, is watching the House and Senate races, particularly 10 incumbents in the House, 10 Republican incumbents that are fighting for their job. It's pretty rare to see so many incumbents forced into a runoff. I mean, he's tweeting that half of them are in jeopardy of losing those seats. I mean, if 5 of those 10 incumbents were to lose tonight, I mean, that would be a pretty big statement.
Oh yeah, because that would mean a total of 10.
Yeah.
Because if 5 went down in
primary.
in June 26, yeah, that's 10% of the House in the first 2 rounds. You know.
Yeah.
Some of the storylines you can follow along in upcoming editions of the Oklahoman and of course online at newsok.com. That'll wrap it up for this one. We'll be back at 9 o'clock with more updated election coverage. I'm Dave Morris alongside Ben Felder, Chris Castile, and Justin Wingeter. We'll be back at 9 p.m.